I think we all know that Todd Downing is not really the person in charge of the Jets offense, but the changes he can make are changes he should make. Let's talk about what should look different under Todd Downing for the Jets on offense today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, October 11th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from ganggreennation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Our episode today is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, today we have our weekly mailbag a couple days later than it usually is. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag. We were supposed to do a mailbag this week on Wednesday, but the Jets had other plans. They fired their coach on Tuesday. So we push our mail back to Friday, and lots of great listener questions today. I'll get to as many of them as I can. Thanks so much for sending in the questions. Couldn't do a mailbag without the questions, so thank you so much. Couldn't do it without you. Let's start. Our first question. Hi, John. What realistically can the offense change in less than 1 week? Personally, I'd like to see more motion and some sort of screen game. Not sure why screens weren't used against all the blitzes the last 2 weeks. However, how quickly can changes to an offense be implemented? And of course, the Jets made a change. If you missed it yesterday, and we did a show on it, Jeff Ulbrich announced that Nathaniel Hackett is no longer the play caller. The play calling duties now go to Todd Downing. Hackett keeps his title as offensive coordinator, but that feels like it's just he's the offensive coordinator in name only. It sounds like Downing is taking control of the offense. Not a moment too soon. Hackett should not have returned in 2024. He should never have been hired in the first place. The guy's just a really, really lousy offensive coach. But the Hackett era seems to be over, even though he's still on the coaching staff. It seems like he has a vastly reduced role. So what can Todd Downing change? And I think a lot of listeners are not going to love the answer to this question. At the end of the day, as much as I dislike Nathaniel Hackett, he was not the guy in charge of the offense. And neither will Todd Downing be the person who's in charge of the offense. Aaron Rodgers is running the offense. There were reports this week that, Hackett essentially was giving him 3 plays at the line of scrimmage, and Rodgers scanned the defense pre-snap, and then he decided which of the 3 was best to use. And you see Rodgers making checks at the line of scrimmage. I mean, essentially, this is what used to happen with Peyton Manning when he was with the Colts and the Broncos. A quarterback of this stature has an incredible amount of leeway at the line of scrimmage to change things. And it's one of the issues with Hackett is just like he brought nothing to the table. Essentially, it was, if Aaron Rodgers, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, gets you into the right play, your offense looks great. Well, I mean, I could probably be an offensive coordinator in that situation. You want a coach adding something to the table. Like, Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL. He's, going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, going to go down as probably one of the 5 greatest quarterbacks who ever played the game. But Andy Reid's adding something. Andy Reid, it's not just they're throwing Mahomes out there and it's up to Mahomes to figure everything out. Andy Reid's putting him in good positions. Hackett never did that. I don't think Todd Downing's a great offensive mind. I mean, if you talk to any Tennessee Titans fan, then the Titans were the last team he was a coordinator for. They thought he was awful. They said the Titans fans said all the same things we say about Hackett now. And at the end of the day, the biggest problem with the Jets offense is the last 2 weeks, Aaron Rodgers has started to look very much like the 40-year-old he is. Aaron Rodgers needs to play better, and he needs to, be able to push the ball down the field more. I think that any changes that are made under Downing are probably going to be more marginal than anything, but these are changes that can at least help the offense a little bit. I think number one, the player usage, maybe he can change the player usage a little bit. And, the things that come to mind are, I love Breece Hall, but I'd like to see Braylon Allen get more carries right now. Now, if the Jets don't run block better, I don't know how big of a difference it's going to make because, we were all screaming about the Jets not giving the ball to Braylon Allen on the 1-yard line against Denver. And rightly so, they should have done it. But last week in a short yardage situation, back-to-back plays, they gave the ball to Braylon Allen, and he was stuffed both times because the Jets could not block. The Jets, I hope they get rid of. I don't know, based on his track record, I'm not sure this is going to happen. But one thing I would suggest is really scale back the 2 tight end sets because, I mean, I hate to say this, I don't want to be too hard on him because I know he's a local kid, but in these 2 tight end sets, Jeremy Ruckert is close to unplayable right now. He can't hit a block. He's not helping you in the passing game. I mean, if anything this year, and this is tough to believe, I'd say he's almost been a downgrade on CJ Uzomah, which is not an easy feat to accomplish. Brendan Bates, the number 3 tight end, the guy they picked up off waivers at the end of the preseason from Chicago, whiffed on 2 blocks on the sequence I was telling you about with Braylon Allen. Now, I actually wrote an article on gangreennation.com this week where I didn't give Bates a pass, but I tried to explain the context that he was not the only problem with those plays, but look, he was a problem. Tyler Conklin, not a great blocker. So I think they got to get rid of these multi-tight end sets. Now, if you're with Downing's history, it could be the opposite. The other thing I'd like to see is just use formations more effectively. Stack your receivers more. I mean, there were 2-3 times in that game against Minnesota where the Vikings used formations. They just stacked a bunch of receivers and they created confusion on the Jets defenders in terms of who has what assignment. There were 2 plays, and I wrote an article on this yesterday on gangreennation.com. You can check it out, where Jets defenders were crashing into each other, and which freed up multiple Vikings receivers who got wide open on the same play. And it was just based on the way the formation was designed. So maybe stack your receivers a little bit more, create more congestion, put more stress on the defense. One of my biggest complaints about Hackett over the last 2 years is the Jets' offensive scheme never puts stress on the defense. One way you do that is you put all your receivers in the same area. You have them running different directions. Defenders get confused. Are we switching this off? Are we not switching this off? Is it going to be a tough guy to follow across the field? It makes your life easier on your quarterback, and it makes life easier on your receivers. Now, again, I don't know how much Downing can really change, and based on his track record, I'm not terribly optimistic he's going to do the things I'm suggesting. I agree with the screen game. I think that, especially if Aaron Rodgers is going to be a quarterback who's just going to get rid of the ball as quick as possible, use the backs more, and especially if he can't run the ball. There's the old expression that sometimes the short passing game could be an extension of the run game. Just if you can't block up front, throw the ball out to the running back in space and send the blockers out there. Maybe that can help you mitigate some of the issues you've got with your run game right now. I'm a little bit more optimistic on that than the other 2 things I've mentioned. And the other aspect of this is, the Jets offense, because of the way Rodgers is playing right now, really has to be predicated on runs after the catch. And right now, Garrett Wilson's really the only receiver who's capable of doing that. I know you can say Malachi Corley, but Corley can't get on the field right now because his route running is just not there. So running backs typically are yak guys, yards after the catch. They catch, they're not running an overly complex route tree. So you just throw them the ball. Sometimes it's check down, sometimes it's screens, and that's an effective way to get that run after the catch game going. That rack game, that yak game, run after the catch, yards after catch. At the end of the day, though, if Rodgers looks like he's looked the last 2 weeks, and it's not just performance, it's that he's looked old. I mean, he's had a tough time with the hits, and we know he's going to be entering this game. We know he's going to be entering this game less than 100%. He's on the injury report. He's suggested that he's dealing with an ankle sprain, so his limited mobility is going to be even more limited in this game. But at the end of the day, it's got to be Rodgers who picks things up. Downing can only do so much, and Downing's not that great of a coach to begin with. Our next question: if Rodgers continues his mediocre to subpar play, how long before we get to Tyrod Taylor? Look, the Jets are not benching Aaron Rodgers for performance reasons. I think that if Rodgers gets to a point health-wise where maybe it's not a good idea to put him on the field, we could see Tyrod Taylor. I mean, it seems like Rodgers is having issues. Even, Kurt Warner was talking about this in his discussions with Rodgers during the Jets-Vikings game. Kurt Warner, the Hall of Fame quarterback, was the announcer who was the analyst for NFL Network during that game. He's mentioned Rodgers is having more difficulty bouncing back from week to week. It's a physical game, and once you get into your late 30s, especially once you get to your 40s, the injuries, the bumps and bruises don't heal as quickly, and they just add up over the course of the season. So I would not be surprised if we saw Tyrod Taylor somewhat soon, but it's going to be about health. It's not the Jets have so much built around Aaron Rodgers. It's not going to be based on performance. I don't know it'd be an interesting move if Ulbrich did it, but I don't know that any Jets coach is going to be allowed to bench Aaron Rodgers for performance reasons. And look, I don't know that Tyrod Taylor can play any better than this. I mean, Tyrod Taylor's pretty old himself. Tyrod Taylor was a guy who was in his prime, was a serviceable starter with the Buffalo Bills, but a guy who really depended on his mobility. And now he's in his 30s. I don't know how mobile Tyrod Taylor is at this point, and he really, really needed his mobility to be effective. So I don't know that we can necessarily expect Tyrod Taylor to be any better than Aaron Rodgers right now. And that statement sounds silly, sounds obvious, right? You would never expect Tyrod Taylor to be better than Aaron Rodgers. So how can the Jets get things on track? Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, I know some people are suggesting a trade for a certain Las Vegas Raiders receiver who has a history with Aaron Rodgers. I don't think that's a great idea. I'll tell you why, continuing here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up all the financial flavors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less than on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get in on the action in over 30 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going to go off? Which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Just download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question. Woody is Woody. He wanted Aaron Rodgers. He got Aaron Rodgers. Chips are all in, like it or not. Is Davante Adams enough? Probably not. Adding Hassan Reddick? Probably not. If we factor in both as Woody wants, Woody will still want more. What other position would you consider trading for? Would you also look to add a T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, or Christian Kirk, and then possibly trade Mike Williams elsewhere? That is quite a question. Look, I don't even think trading for Davante Adams is a great idea right now. If this team doesn't win on Monday, I think we're at the point where we could say this team would be much better off being a seller at the deadline, because at 2-4, it's not just the 2-4, because the AFC East could be the type of division where 9 or 10 wins get you the division title this year. But at 2-4, I would have zero faith in the Jets' ability to get to 9 or 10 wins. And it's not just the record, it's the way they've looked. This team has really played one good game all season long against New England. At 2-3, they've played 3 lousy. All 3 of the losses have been lousy performances. It's not like they stood toe to toe against a great team, and any of the losses and barely lost by a field goal. Yeah, I know Minnesota's undefeated, and I know they lost by 6, but Minnesota was awful in that game, and the Jets were worse. Even the win against Tennessee, I don't think the Jets played very well. This team has not played at a high level, and it hasn't shown it's capable of playing at a high level. And based on the way Rodgers looks right now, I think you have to question, is this team capable of playing at a high level consistently? We know they're capable of playing at a high level for 1 week. They did it against New England, but can they string 3 months together of great football? I don't think so at this point. If they lose to Buffalo, I'll be pretty convinced. And I don't think Davante Adams makes that big of a difference. And I think part of the problem with trading for Davante Adams is that it's kind of the same thing as trading for Rodgers or signing Tyron Smith. You're signing a guy because he was at the top of the league like 2-3 years ago, and he probably isn't right now. So you're getting a guy, and look, I don't think Rodgers is the worst quarterback in the league. I don't think Tyron Smith is the worst left tackle in the league, but these guys are playing nowhere near their normal career level, and that's unlikely to change because of their age. And I think Davante Adams in his 30s, his days of being a top 3 receiver in this league are over. I think it's another situation where the media is trying to drum up interest. I think a lot of people are trying to get clicks out of it. I think a lot of people are trying to get eyeballs on their TV screens, like ESPN, when they keep, the way they keep mentioning this. But it's not the type of move that I think really moves the needle for the Jets. And we're talking, I don't think even that's a good idea. I think if the Jets lose this game, we should be talking about, who do you trade at the deadline? Do you look to trade Morgan Moses? Do you look to trade Tyron Smith? Do you look to trade CJ Mosley? Do you look to trade Williams? Because maybe you can get some picks in return and just start, the turnaround again. I hate that we're talking this way, but it certainly looks like that's the direction we're heading at the moment. So, and the question is, should the Jets, after they trade for Adams and after they sign Hassan Reddick, should they do even more? I don't even think they should do those first couple things, because at the end of the day, this team is built, and no matter what you do, the biggest issue right now is, again, the quarterback looks like he's 40 years old, and that's not going to change. Yeah, Davante Adams probably would help the team, but I don't think it would help that much, especially, who's he going to be taking targets from? He's probably going to be taking a bunch of Garrett Wilson's targets away. Garrett Wilson and Rodgers seem like they're finally getting on the same page after that game in London. So I don't think any of this is a good idea. I think that, I don't think I would be a heavy buyer. I think I'd be a heavy seller at the deadline if the Jets lose. If they win against Buffalo, I still think it's a tough road. We can at least have a discussion on it. Next question, John. This has probably been asked previously, but I feel compelled to ask anyway. Can the Jets win the Super Bowl with Woody Johnson owning the club? I don't think they can win the Super Bowl with Woody Johnson acting like this. And I think the distressing thing with Woody Johnson is that it's almost like he's gotten worse during his tenure, because I actually would have argued in like 2010 that he was a little underrated, because that first decade he owned the team, he was criticized a lot. A lot of people said he's so cheap, and there's never really been any evidence Woody's cheap. It's interesting because Woody's always had the reputation for being cheap, but the Jets have always spent to the cap. So Woody's not cheap. Woody's just a bad owner. And what's disturbing is like the first decade he was criticized a lot. And I actually thought a lot of the criticism the first decade was unfair, because the team was actually pretty successful. They went to the playoffs in 2001 and 2002. They went to the playoffs in 2004, 06, then the Rex years. Woody's first decade owning the team, they never won the Super Bowl, but they were actually one of the more successful franchises in the league. And it's all fallen apart the last 14, 15 years. And it's felt like in that time, Woody's taken on a more active role. And it's just, he doesn't know what he doesn't know. That's the best way I can put it, is that he doesn't understand basic elements of the game. And that's disturbing in and of itself. What makes a great coach? What makes a great GM? How do you build a team that can win consistently? I don't think Woody could give you an answer for that. I would love to have like Woody on this podcast and ask him some of these questions, because I doubt he understands this. I doubt Woody understands anything about X's and O's. And look, you don't need your owner to be the smartest guy in the room. You don't need him to be the guy who understands the most about football. But I think one of the things that's tough in the NFL when you don't have a good owner is inevitably the owner is going to come into play on major decisions. And what you want is a guy like Dan Rooney, the great Steelers owner, who there's a story in the draft room in 2004 that there was some hesitation about the Steelers drafting Ben Roethlisberger. And at that point, Dan Rooney mentioned that, you know what, I was here in 1983 when we passed on Dan Marino, and that was always a big mistake. If we have Roethlisberger graded as a potential franchise quarterback, we should take him, because we don't want to make that same mistake again. That's the type of thing you're looking for with ownership. Because at the end of the day, owners, I always say Woody should not be involved, but it's very difficult for an owner to not be involved in the NFL. I mean, I think that I hate to say this. I almost feel like at this point I'm just waiting Woody out. I mean, maybe he gets bored. Maybe he gets tired of losing. Maybe he gets tired of all the criticism and just sells the team. Or maybe it just, I guess if you're looking for real hope under Woody, look what's happening with the New York Knicks, where James Dolan, after, decades of being the dumbest owner in sports, is finally like brought in quality people and let them run the team and built the team the right way. Right now, one of the biggest problems with Woody is that he never lets his people build the team the right way. They're always looking for the quick fix. We talked about this the other day with Robert Saleh. They're always looking for the quick fix. They're always looking for the shortcut. They never honestly assess their situation. They never say, you know what, we're pretty far away. We need to build up a sturdy structure. They always think we're close. This one move will get us to the promised land. That's a big problem with Woody. And until that changes, and look, I'm always an optimist. I've seen horrible owners improve. Usually they do it before 25 years after owning the team. So I'll continue to hope that Woody, figures it out. But man, it's just tough. And I think one of the frustrating things is this last rebuild. It actually felt to me like the Jets were making progress. Look, Joe Douglas missed on too many of his moves. He made a lot of bad signings. He whiffed on critical draft picks like Zach Wilson, Mekhi Becton. But at the end of the day, the Jets were actually like building this thing the right way. They hit on a lot of the 2022 draft class was starting to show returns. The team was actually moving in the right direction. And when he stepped in and took over, and he dictated changes to the coaching staff. He dictated we're not only it's one thing to trade for Rodgers, it's another thing to like completely tear down your plan and retrofit everything to Rodgers' whims. Let's bring in Alan Lazard, let's bring in Randall Cobb, let's bring in Nathaniel Hackett. That's the issue. The issue wasn't really trading for Rodgers itself. It's the way Woody implemented the trade. And that's the thing that's been the issue with the Jets. I mean, keeping Rex Ryan around when you're looking for a new GM. GMs don't want it, so you end up with John Idzik. Let's not even talk about him appointing his brother when Woody went over to the United Kingdom as the ambassador. He appointed his brother, who had no clue how to run a team, as the guy in charge. And His brother was the guy who hired Adam Gase. His brother was the guy who let Mike McCagnon spend a record amount in free agency and then fire him months later. The Johnson, you can say a lot about the issues the Jets have had through the years. The last 13, 14 years, there's only been one constant. Coaches have changed, general managers have changed, players have changed. The only constant is the Johnson brothers as the owners until they figure this thing out. And I'm almost to the point where part of me's hoping he figures it out. Part of me just feel like I'm waiting him out, but things are never going to change in a meaningful way until that happens. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a search, what he's unfortunately probably going to oversee. That's the head coaching search that will follow. What are Jeff Ulbrich's odds? I think it very much depends on what happens here. Could there be an old rival who enters the mix? I kind of doubt it, but we'll talk about all this ahead here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Right now, the Jets are 2.5-point underdogs against the Buffalo Bills. They will be at home on Monday night, so home underdogs. Is this the time of year where you start betting on the home underdogs? Well, if you're a Jets fan who believes Jeff Ulbrich's going to turn it around, maybe. Interestingly, though, this line has not changed. It was 2.5 points when it opened, and Robert Saleh was still the Jets head coach. So it doesn't seem like the betting lines really believe Ulbrich's going to make that big of a difference. The Jets have an opportunity to prove them wrong, and so do you on FanDuel, because, again, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just go to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Again, that's FanDuel.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. We continue now with our weekly mailbag. If Jeff Ulbrich wins several games in a row and the offense is cooking, could the Jets name him the permanent head coach? I would not do that. Look, I think Ulbrich has earned an interview based on his work as defensive coordinator. I'm open to the idea of him eventually taking over as the full-time head coach if he does well, but I think the Jets owe it to themselves to conduct a full coaching search. I think that sometimes teams get a little bit too swayed by what happens when a guy comes in and succeeds with the interim label. And look, the Jets are going to be in a completely different situation next year, likely. If we are of the mindset that Aaron Rodgers is going to retire and the Jets are going to have to reset their cap situation, the skill set that will help you win games this year is going to be very different from next year. And look, even if Rodgers comes back next year, okay, 2 years down the line, the head coach is going to need to deal with the post-Rodgers world. So you're going to need a guy who understands how to build from the ground up, because the Jets are going to have to turn a lot over. A lot of the key players on this team are older and are going to need to be replaced. It's probably going to be a situation where the Jets take a step back. And I mean, I don't know. Based on the way they're playing, maybe it won't be such a step back. But I don't know that winning this year necessarily is what should get Ulbrich the job. Now, I think it's a prerequisite. I think he's got to win this year in order to have a shot at getting the full-time job. But I think you got to speak with a lot of candidates, and you got to figure out who has the best plan to build this thing from the ground up after Rodgers departs. Because at the end of the day, either whether it's this year or next year, Rodgers is not going to be here in the very near future. And the challenge for the challenge for the head coach then becomes very different from what it is now. So I would look, I think that results do matter for Ulbrich. I think if he goes out there and, only wins one game the rest of the way, there's no shot he's getting the permanent head coaching job. But I think it would be premature. And I think sometimes look at what's happening right now with the Raiders and Antonio Pierce. Sometimes teams just buy a little bit too much into the results with the interim label. The interim situation is an interesting dynamic. It's very different when you're the guy, when you're not taking over on the fly, when you're when you've actually got time to implement your vision. I think the Jets should really think long and hard about interviewing other candidates. Again, I'm not saying Ulbrich should be out. I think he should get his shot, and he's got an opportunity to audition, but he needs to have a plan for the post-Rodgers world. And you can only find out who has the best plan for that by interviewing the candidates. Next question. How do you feel about Mike Vrabel as head coach? I think he'd be a good choice. I think he did a good job with the Tennessee Titans. I know he's not a guy who comes from an offensive background. I think people get too obsessed with whether the coach comes from an offensive background or not. A coach from a non-offensive background can be a good coach. He can build a good offense. Josh Allen developed under Sean McDermott, who was a defensive coordinator. Lamar Jackson developed under John Harbaugh, who was a special teams coach. And I guess he was a secondary coach for a year with the Eagles. It's not whether or not you come from an offensive background. It's, do you coach in a modern way? Do you understand the role of the passing game? Are you going to go out and hire good coordinators? Are you going to be aggressive with your decision making? Vrabel's one of the best in-game coaches in the league, I think. He modern with the way he approaches fourth downs and 2-point conversions. Really seems like a guy who gets analytics. And my hesitation would be that he did employ Todd Downing as his offensive coordinator, and Downing's not very good. But look, he hired 2 offensive coordinators who got head coaching jobs. Matt LaFleur, not Mike LaFleur. Matt LaFleur, who was his first offensive coordinator with the Titans, who went on to become head coach of the Green Bay Packers, and Arthur Smith, who did not succeed with Falcons head coach. But look, if you get a head coaching job as an offensive coordinator, it means you were a good offensive coordinator. So this is a guy, look, he's not batting 1,000. He did hire Todd Downing, but this is a guy who does know how to hire good offensive coordinators. I think he'd be a good hire. And the other thing is, like, look, Woody Johnson's shown that he has no idea how to scout assistant coaches who are going to be good head coaches. So go with the proven guy. Go with the guy who's won. Vrabel won in Tennessee. I think he's a very good coach. Is he the greatest coach in the league? No, but I think they just need somebody who can stabilize this thing, somebody who knows what he's doing on day one, someone who's not going to be training on the job the way these first-time coaches always are for this team. So I'd be all for it. I think it would be a very good move. Next question: what does it take for Joe Douglas to not get fired after this season? I mean, I think this team needs to get to the playoffs. I think it's that simple. I think it's playoffs or bust. I think if Jets don't make the playoffs, Douglas is out. Now, the interesting scenario is what if it's a 9-8, 7 seed and they get blown out in the first round? I don't know what Woody does then. My hunch would be Woody would keep him. I don't think Woody should keep him. My hunch is that Woody would keep him, but that's interesting. Look, this team had Super Bowl expectations, so I don't think Douglas can survive a disappointing season. If we stay on the current trajectory we're on right now, Douglas is finished. I think the minimum's you got to make the playoffs and maybe even win a game or two. I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to Woody, but I think he's guaranteed to be gone if he misses the playoff, if the Jets miss the playoffs this year. Last question. I keep hearing people suggest Bill Belichick as head coach for next year. Assume for a moment this fantasy becomes a reality and he brings along Josh McDaniels as offensive coordinator and Matt Patricia as defensive coordinator. Would you sign up for that? Obviously, Bill hates Woody and the Jets, but this opportunity to turn the organization around and get Kraft angry would be a good ego boost. I think you're right. Look, this is a hypothetical question because Bill Belichick's not going to come coach the Jets. Bill Belichick, and look, if you've read up on Bill Belichick, one thing that's clear is that the experience he had his first head coaching job in Cleveland stuck with him. And Belichick's issue was that he's kind of been open about this. He did not feel like he had a good owner in Art Modell. And he felt like that was one of the reasons he failed. So he always said in his next job, I'm going to make sure there's an owner that gets it. And he went on after he was fired by Cleveland. He worked for a year as a Patriots assistant under Bill Parcells. He was the secondary coach, and he bonded with Robert Kraft. In fact, Robert Kraft almost hired him in 1997 after Bill Parcells left, but Kraft felt like it was a little too soon, that he needed a break from Parcells because the Parcells-Patriots divorce was very ugly, and Kraft felt like he needed to turn the page, so he hired Pete Carroll instead, who was going on to big things himself. So I don't think Belichick would ever take the job. Would I be interested? I would not. I think that, at Belichick's age, he's not a guy who's going to be around for a longer build. I think I would want a guy who's going to be around for the duration. And I think there are also fair questions to be asked as the game passed Belichick by. I think that a lot of Belichick's methods have proven to be outdated, especially near the end of his time in New England. I actually think Belichick's being treated a little unfairly. I think Brady leaves and wins in Tampa Bay, and the Patriots kind of fall back to earth. Everybody assumes, well, Belichick wasn't that good. Belichick was a great coach. I don't know that he's like the guy I'd want right now. The only scenario where I'd hire Belichick is maybe a team like Dallas. I would hire him if I had a team that had all the talent in the world but kept coming up short in the big spot. And it was kind of like 24, 25 years ago. The LA Lakers had Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, and they couldn't win the championships. So they brought in Phil Jackson, who was Michael Jordan's coach with the Bulls, to teach them how to win. And I feel like if you were in a spot where you needed like a football version of Phil Jackson, who the pieces are all in place, you don't need to worry about Belichick scouting being outdated. You just need someone to come in and teach them how to win. That's the situation where Belichick makes sense to me. But I don't think you'd want Belichick in a situation. Again, Rodgers, I think increasingly it's looking like Rodgers is not going to be here next year. I mean, look, my mind could be different in a week. He goes out there and tears up the Buffalo Bills for 330 yards. Maybe I'll be saying something different in a week. But increasingly, it looks like Rodgers may not be here next year. And even if he is, he's not going to be here in 2 years. So you'll need a builder. You need somebody who can start. I don't think the Jets are starting from scratch this time because they have Sauce Gardner. They'll have Garrett Wilson. I'm assuming these guys will get contract extensions. So it's not going to be as bad of a rebuild as it was in 2020, 2021. But I still think you want someone who's going to be around for the duration. I don't know that Belichick will at his age. I think Belichick's a short-term guy. I think maybe he wants to win that 7th Super Bowl, become the first coach to win with multiple teams. And I don't think he's around for a total overhaul. And even if he was, I got questions whether he's capable of pulling it off. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll be back on Monday to preview Jets Bills.